Okay, perfect. So just starting off by saying thank you for allowing us to interview you. We know your day's probably very busy, so we appreciate you taking the time to share your insights on the medtech industry. Um, and congratulations on your YouTube channel, by the way. I
Thank
actually
you.
find a lot of
Thanks.
your videos to be insightful,
Oh,
especially the one
thank you.
you posted last week with Hogne Ula.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
That
okay.
was
Well,
very
I'm
helpful.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm
Yeah,
really thrilled. And thank you for inviting me. Thanks for, I guess, send me your questions, etc. Like I am, yeah, I would be happy if I can help.
certainly. Yeah. So the reason we reached out to you today is
Mhm.
because we're interested in your vast experience. So we thought it would be great to interview you to get some insight on this biomedical engineering project we're working on.
Sure.
So what we're just some quick background, and before I start with what the project is, I'll just quickly
Yeah.
introduce myself. I'm Nadia. I just finished my third year of mechanical and biomedical engineering, and I'm currently on internship with CNOC. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves, please? Maybe Matt.
Yeah, sure. I'm Matt. I'm currently in my third year of chemical biomedical engineering.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you
Hi,
too.
hi Anna. I'm Chan.
Hi.
Hi. I'm currently in my third year of chemical engineering.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Okay, perfect. So right now we're working on we're working through a medical device design class, and we're going through the needs statement concept generation phase of our project. And where we
Okay.
could really use your help is just to get some insights on a few questions that we've prepared for you here.
Okay.
Before I jump
Let's see if I can answer them. Let's see. I'm curious.
For sure. Yeah. So before we jump into the project specific questions, we'd like to know what intrigued you to pursue a career as a medical sales consultant or agent.
Mhm. Mhm. It's a good question. I think I never really dreamt about it. I think when I did my master's program, which is biomedical technology, I was just searching for ways how to get into the business side of this field. And I think this is how I came up with sales and marketing. Because eventually, while I was going through my program, I realized that I really enjoy the business aspect of it.
Mhm.
It was actually very interesting to learn about business aspect, but medical device, biotech, and pharma industries. And out of three, I thought like out of all of them, medical devices were the most at that point, like the most intriguing for me. And it's such a fast developing, fast changing field. And I thought, okay, what should I do in order to learn business, and not only learn business but also learn it firsthand? And I think sales allows you to do so, because sales is it's actually quite broad term, because I have chance to work with different departments, different people, and I'm also a frontliner. I work with end users. So I think that was the key mission for me at that time, key goal, to get to know how the end users are, what kind of experience they have with medical equipment. That's how I searched through and I decided, okay, sales and marketing is my way to go. And yeah, and I started just pursuing it.
Okay. Well, I guess the follow-up question sort of relates to something you touched on right now. So within your role working, through a medical, I think Ava Medical,
Yeah.
as a medical device distributor, you work closely, as you said, with healthcare personnel and probably Alberta Health Services representatives.
Yeah.
What do you currently perceive to be the biggest need in healthcare, specifically in terms of medical devices?
It's a very, it's a good question, but not that easy to answer, I think. I would say the diagnostic tools are still in high demand. Anything that is related to diagnostics would be something that hospitals and end users are always looking for. And if we're talking about the very broad spectrum, right? But diagnostics of everything. And I think companies are doing quite a good job of developing new technologies, new ways to monitor, new ways to diagnose diseases, etc. Like let's talk about imaging, for example. Like the imaging equipment is getting better and better every year. And I think there's still demand for it, because the better you can diagnose, the better you can address the disease, right? So I think that is still one of the most developing and most demanding things that I see.
Okay, certainly. So diagnostic tools.
Yeah.
So more specifically, what would you perceive to be, and I guess because this relates to your background, the biggest need in terms of neurosurgery?
Neurosurgery, yeah. Well, and actually, that would be also diagnostics, because I think the navigation systems, the navigation that allows neurosurgeons to navigate throughout the brain, because we still do not know everything about brain, right? So,
Absolutely.
and it's very important to get the proper mapping for surgeons when they go in and they try to, let's say, remove the lesion of any kind in any nature. So they are looking for better ways to, first of all, see it on imaging before they open up, right, brain and go in, and also definitely not to damage areas they're not supposed to be, touched.
Operating on.
That's another area. So I think in neurosurgery, again, diagnostic and navigation would be the most required at this moment. That would be the most required field.
Okay.
Can
So
I actually add something else? I kind of keep,
of course.
another thing that I'm thinking of, it's also minimally invasive tools. I think in general in medical devices, and we're talking mostly about surgical because it's just I work mostly with surgical, but I think in multiple specialties, I think minimally invasive devices are also on a rise, because again, we're trying to minimize the time of surgery, the wound, the opening of the body, so we can shorten out the time for recovery for patients. So I think minimally invasive devices of any kind, they're also on in high demand right now.
Certainly. Okay, so I guess another question would be that how do these medical practitioners communicate the need for a new medical device? So in your role, you distribute a lot of, so you probably work with a lot of vendors to source these medical equipment, and then, pitch the idea to Alberta Health Services or to independent I guess hospitals or physicians themselves. How do they communicate the need for a new medical device?
Well, there are a few ways. I think sometimes they just take an equipment, they use it, and they say, "Oh, it'd be nice to have this in it." That's it. Because they while they're working with it, they just can, during this procedure, they say, "Oh, it'd be nice to have this," and that's how that can be translated to the company. And I say, "By the way, for this particular equipment, maybe it's better to have an additional feature or something, or maybe it's too heavy. Can you remove the weight of the back end of the forceps, for example?" I think that's one of the ways that they communicate. I also think, and I've seen it before, where surgeons actually have their own ideas. In that case, they approach companies and they ask them if they can build something either custom made for them, or maybe they can partner and do something together. And companies are always open to that, because I think for companies, it's always, it's great to know if this is something that surgeons need, if it's coming from the end user. It's always nice to have that feedback, and they can actually implement something like that, and they can test it out. So I've seen both. I've seen surgeons approaching companies as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. No, I think, yeah, just the feedback. And if surgeon would share feedback with me, I can always send it to the company, and company can think through if they want to, or they can approach the surgeon and ask them questions. Sometimes surgeons do prototypes themselves too. It depends on what it is, of course. There's some devices that they actually can make themselves, or they can create a prototype, and then they can present to the company and say, "Oh yeah, that would be like very useful for this in this procedure."
Oh, interesting. Okay. So have you ever personally worked closely with medical device designers?
Not designers per se, but I think I worked with R&D team, and I've seen a couple R&D teams, including one at Johnson & Johnson, in a specific area. They're working in neurointerventional radiology area. So I've seen how the process, how they build it, how they prototype, and they also try to bring surgeons in to consult with them before they start producing something, right? So they have a few prototypes, they tested everything, and they said, okay, we have 3 leads, and now we have to bring surgeons and users and ask them how those prototypes work and if they like them or they don't. So
Mhm.
I've seen that process. And I also worked with a couple of startups where I've seen that they really just starting and exploring, and they're trying to source materials, and they're trying to develop the design. I was not part of that process, but I saw it. I've seen it, and yeah, it's actually very interesting, and I can see why it can be very challenging, especially the early stage.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds very interesting.
Mhm.
So, I guess out of curiosity, in your experience working with these R&D teams, or for Johnson and
Yeah,
Johnson, for example,
yeah.
you feel like the very first stakeholders that are consulted are physicians rather than patients?
In surgical space, yes.
Okay.
I think there will be some specialties where maybe that will be patients, and their
Mhm.
feedback will be also included in the development of the device. But
Mhm.
in surgical space, I would say yes, it will be mostly surgeons, because for them, that's the tool that they're using. And they are choosing the tool regardless. So the choosing depends on the patient's need, or depending on the access to whichever part of the body they're trying to access.
Mhm. Certainly. Okay.
They can, sorry, sorry
Go
for
ahead.
interruption, but they can
Absolutely.
consult with patients later on. Let's say if it's implantable device and they
Okay.
already implanted it, or there's a clinical trial or something, then yes, of course, they can actually talk to patient afterwards and see how you feel. And
Mhm.
they have a bunch of questionnaires and follow-up questions. But initially in the product development stage, I think it's mostly engineers that are working on it. And then of course, physicians who will be using as a tool or choosing it according to clinical needs.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Okay, so jumping towards a more specific,
Mhm.
the more specific spectrum of this interview, we wanted to get your feedback on a specific idea that we have for
Okay.
this biomedical engineering class.
Sure.
And essentially, our group identified a need for a wearable technology that would reduce accidental drowning incidents.
Okay.
So we're still in the need screening concept generation phase, and we wanted to get your opinion. From your experience, what do you think are the prospects of success for such a technology?
Well, I would have to know a little bit more about technology though, because so you said it's a wearable,
It's
and
yeah.
what is it? Is it a monitor like you wear on your wrist,
Mhm.
something like that?
Yeah, so we're essentially still in the concept generation phase, and what we perceive the idea to be essentially is a wearable technology, and it could be through the implementation of certain motion analysis
Yeah.
softwares
Yeah.
that the technology flags erratic motion and
Mm-hmm.
detects a potential drowning hazard, and
Okay.
therefore alerts lifeguards that a patron requires assistance. So that's essentially what we have in terms of a concept, a
Okay.
broad concept, and we wanted to get your input in terms of success, potential success, commercial viability.
Yeah.
Do you see this as something being publicly mandated, or something that can be sold to, the commercial end user? Just your general opinions, essentially.
Okay. Well, I guess I do not have enough information
Hmm.
to have full understanding, I guess, and to give
Hmm.
you proper advice or my opinion. But based on what you told me, what you just
Hmm.
shared, so wearable technologies are very common right now, and they are on the rise, as you know. Like
Hmm.
it's definitely something that many companies are exploring for different reasons, for different parameters, registration, different applications. Like it can be anything from just counting your steps all the way to like real monitoring of your health and blood pressure, things like that are very crucial for patients, let's say. So anywhere from healthy people to unhealthy people. So I think from that perspective, yes, I think it has big potential. I do not know the market size though. Is this technology is mostly for swimmers in the swimming pool or in open waters?
Hmm.
Who would buy them?
Hmm.
Would that be the guard who has that controlling mechanism who will register certain things, or there will be people swimming and they will be purchasing, and why? So I think that those are the questions you have to ask yourself, and I
Hmm.
have those right away because I don't know who is your target audience, like who are your customers.
Mhm. So our target market would essentially be the end user. They would be the ones using the wearable technology, and it would somehow be integrated with the aquatic center, or any location that has a lifeguard on site that
Okay.
would relay the signals or messaging that a specific person may require assistance. And it's more so because a lot of the drowning accidents happen because of, lifeguards being distracted or there being too many people in one location. So it's easy
Okay.
to miss someone requiring help. In certain places where people are just learning to swim, or so these are potential target
Yeah.
markets that we're
Okay.
looking. Mhm.
And it's a very common problem because I think you either have to address a very common problem, so a big market, or it's very niche and nobody's playing in it, or I mean, very few companies are playing with it. So what's your situation? Because I'm not aware of the market size or how common it is that people are drowning, they're interested in this.
I think so. According to the World Health Organization, there's about 350,000 preventable drowning accidents per year.
Okay.
So I would definitely say that's a niche market to some extent.
Yeah.
But it's one that it can also, we see it being able to like springboard this into other markets as well. For example, the surfing market is much larger, and it's hard to monitor people when specific conditions change. It's hard to let surfers know that it's no longer safe, so they should come back to shore. So we see this as something that can be, it's essentially a proof of concept, is why we want to implement, or why we would think to implement in an aquatic center.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Well, I think if you identify the niche and identify the market, I think it can be a very viable idea. And with wearables, again, right now you have all the technologies and all the sensors. They are available. As far as I know, they can be very cheap, and you can integrate them in whatever, like the bracelet or whichever you choose for the wearable. You can even, I don't know if you consider that option, but you can potentially work or partner with someone who already makes wearables, and you just build the back end of it, right? So I don't know, what's your plan there? How long you've been working on this project for?
Just a couple of weeks. It's just for a class,
Okay,
and
so
then
it's brand new. Okay.
it's very brand new. We're just testing the concept and
Yes,
playing
you
around
have
with
to, yeah.
some ideas.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're still answering questions. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'd like to open the floor to my colleagues here. If Matt or Tran would like to ask some of the questions that we have in the interview list, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
So our next question here is, do you think the technology would have higher chances of success if it was government mandated, as in like mandated by the aquatic facility, or sold to the direct users?
It's a good one. It's a good one. I actually think that if you can convince, government to mandate it, I think, of course, the uptake of technology will be higher. Obviously, because if people want to go and use the facility, they'll have to comply. On the personal freedom, I think it's better to sell just to end user, because they should be responsible for their own decisions. But I think from the business perspective, yes, if you can prove that it will save people's lives, and it's not a big deal to wear that bracelet for like whatever, an hour session for training and swimming. And if that can be implemented on a higher level, maybe not even government, but let's say even, like in the center you're implementing it in, I think that will be the better option. I hope I answered. It's just like, it's a dilemma, but I think, yes, definitely. If you can have someone to mandate it, yes, definitely, you'll have much more uptake.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, it's definitely a balance of personal freedom versus safety of the public that you would go for. So, maybe we would want to shoot for a different type of aquatic facility, more geared towards family safety than one where it's just all about lane swimming and individualism.
Yeah, because I think if they hire the guard already who is already watching people, you can just say an extra measure is you just wear this bracelet for, I don't know, half an hour while you're in water, right? So it depends on technology too, like what is it that you are offering, but I think it's not that hard to implement.
I see.
Yeah.
So kind of expanding on that, can you comment on the regulatory aspect of mandating the use of this technology in aquatic centers?
That I actually don't really know, because they probably have their own rules, because I know in medical field it's much more regulated and much more controlled in a way, and everything has to be tested before it can be mandated, right? In aquatic centers and safety, I think it will be a bit easier path, because you will have to test the technology, you'll have to prove your concept that it's working. But I think it shouldn't have a huge regulatory problem. I would still think that depending on what kind of sensors you have, let's say if it's a bracelet, I don't know what you placing there. I would still think that you will have to have some sort of a approval for sensors and making sure that they work properly. So that will be something that you will deal with regulatory bodies just to make sure it's safe. But in terms of implementing it to the market, I don't see a big problem. Because eventually it'll be like Fitbit, right? Relatively like a Fitbit.
Yeah.
Bracelet.
Yeah, and like even as you said earlier, maybe using someone's existing platform like a Fitbit and then making our own back-end software for it.
Yeah.
Okay. So next question here. In your experience, would the private sector or public sector be more inclined to adopting these new technologies or practice, particularly where public safety is involved?
Well, from my experience, I think, okay, private sector is driven by revenue, right? Revenue generation. So if you can bring a technology, and I'm talking about general terms right now, not specifically what you're trying to do, but in general. So if you bring a technology that will allow to save, well, I guess either save time or make something more efficient or reduce risk of any type of injury, let's say, in the workplace. In those cases, I think private sector will be much more efficient in implementing new technologies. So for them, they think, okay, we're going to spend this much here, but we're going to save this much here because it will be more efficient. We will not have any problems, no complaints, right? Like in general, this is how private sector looks at new technology. And I think they also have easier access to money to invest in it, because same difference, it's more commercialized and more like, hey, yes, profit, we can save money here, we can make money here. With public sector, I think it's not the case usually, but if it comes to safety, I think they're much more concerned about it. So they don't probably think about, oh, we're going to spend money here, we're going to make money here. They'd rather spend money because it's public service, public health. But it will take some time for them to adopt the technology, because they will have to be convinced that they can actually find the budget, dedicate the budget for it, and that will definitely have some sort of a positive outcome for public safety. So very different approaches, and this is why it's really hard to say. It depends how you market the technology and what kind of benefits it will bring to both sides, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good answer.
I guess a question that could play into that is, do you perceive that this would be easier to implement in a universal healthcare system or a private healthcare system?
Your technology?
Yeah, if it were a similar technology where it concerns public safety, do you feel like it's easier to implement or to pitch the idea in a universal healthcare system or a public or a private
one?
I
guess the question is, let's say we're talking about aquatic centers. Let's say that's your target market, right?
Yeah.
Are they privately owned or are they government owned? And I also think, because they do probably charge people to come to their facilities. So to me, they're all for-profit organizations, no matter what, regardless who owns them. I would think that in those type of situations, you have to behave more like you're selling to a private sector in a way, because for them, they can actually sell that idea to their users, people who pay for membership, or families that send kids for training, right, to those facilities. They can say, by the way, you do pay whatever, $50 a month, I don't know, I'm just picking a number. But what we have, not only we have the safeguard at all time who will be watching, we also have this new technology that we implemented and you're going to use in that actually make sense because it will be, I don't know, 30% safer, or the chances of drowning are, I don't know, reduced by 90%. Like, I don't know, something like that. Of course, you will have to do the testing, etc. So I think in this type of situation, you probably will treat it as more of a private sector sale, in my view, how I see it at this point. Government, I'm not sure, because if there are some public areas where, let's say, I don't know if it's a lake, I don't know, like how it's been run, who will be in charge of setting up the safety rules there. In those cases, that will be more of a public safety and public services sale. That'll be my guess.
Okay. That makes sense. So I guess a question here. I've already mentioned that the technology would likely use some type of motion analysis. That's one idea that's thrown out there. But from your background as a medical physician, could you suggest other experimental techniques that the technology could potentially leverage? For example, heart rate or blood oxygen saturation. What is a medical indicator that we can monitor well before an imminent risk is present?
Heart rate will be a good one. I'm not sure about the oxygen. Plus, I don't know how you would measure it through the skin. I'm not sure if that's even at this point of time possible. Okay. Blood pressure, heart monitoring, like heart rate. Actually, I don't know. Like I have to probably learn a little bit more in terms of what kind of sensors are already there, because I know motion sensors are very precise nowadays, and you can actually get so much data just from motion sensors. But I'm not sure. Well, heart rate definitely will correlate, right, with panic or with the person who is in stress. But I don't know if there's anything else that you can actually implement. You could probably, well, that will be your research actually. What you can add to it, because I don't know what is it there that can immediately tell you, because you probably want to have at least 2 to 3 parameters, because let's say if 2 parameters are up and 1 is down, maybe it's person's not even drowning, right? Maybe something, I don't know, maybe they had a cramp. But if you have all 3, red flags, so then yes, definitely. So I don't know how you will write that algorithm.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, have you worked in the wearable device space by any chance?
No, but I know a little bit about it, because I had an experience talking about a potential way of wearables in one of the companies that I have experience to work with. And this is why I know that there's so many ways to use wearable technology nowadays, even in healthcare space, because there's so many ways for, especially patients, to wear something that will tell them, yes, you have a problem, or your heart rate is too high, do something. But not direct experience, no.
Okay. And through these indirect experiences, what is your opinion on how do I phrase this? Like, what are the characteristics of a wearable device that make it more appealing to the user and easier to adopt?
And that was actually the question that we were trying to answer at that time as well. It has to be something, well, in your case, I think you're targeting a niche, which I do not see a big problem. So, because it should be something light and nice, and not something that will impair emotion, right? Like you want to have it light so a person can still swim freely. But with your technology, you only use it for, I don't know, an hour of training, or let's say 2 hours of swimming, and that's it. I think it's much harder to make people to wear it at all times when it's constant monitoring something. But with your case, I actually think that is the benefit. So you only put it on for a certain period of time, and you take it off after.
Okay, makes sense. All right. I think I am done in terms of my questions.
Okay.
Matt or Tran, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask Anna? Anything about the needs screening for our project, or potentially any other, just in general?
I'm not sure if you would be able to answer this, but I'm kind of thinking about the equality of this device. So obviously, if a user pays for it, they'll have, a higher percentage of not drowning. Would that cause like maybe political issues in Canada, because it's all about the universal healthcare and we're all on the same playing field instead of pay to win for these medical devices?
So what you're trying to ask, like, should you even charge anything for something like that?
Yeah,
Or,
like could it even be justified charging extra for a medical device in a public setting?
I think so. It depends how much you're charging. It's like the same as some of the drugs, right? And there were a few scandals in the past where the drug that like, I don't know, it's a niche drug, right? Orphan drug, and only, I don't know, 100,000 people are using it, not millions. And the drug was available for, let's say, $20, and then through acquisitions, company decided to raise the price to 100, and a huge backlash happened. So I think in those type of scenarios, yes, I can see the problem if it's too expensive and it's not justifiable. But if it's a reasonable price, and again depending on market, I think it's fine, because you eventually you're just charging for material you use and the software that you provide, and it's a service. So in unless government funds you and gives you money to build it for them, I think yes, I think it's reasonable to charge something. It depends how much though, and what is it that, obviously, what is it that your resources, and how much resources did you use for it, right? And how you want to be compensated for it.
So it really
'Cause it still
depends
is-
on the initial investment and who was backing it from the beginning, I guess.
I think so. Yeah, I would think so. Because to me, it's still a service. It's still something that you built. So I do not see why wouldn't you charge, because you obviously people understand that there is some cost associated with development of something like that. But yeah, I mean, if government can pay for it, then why not, right? But I don't know if that will be something. But you can explore it. Why not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
What about you, Tran? Do you have any questions?
No, actually, I think I'm good for today.
You're good.
Okay.
Okay. And guys, is it like more of a project that you just work for, let's say, a month or two, and that's it, or it's something that you potentially will take out of university and just keep working on?
I think it depends on how far we get along on the project, and obviously everyone's interests. But it's definitely something I'm interested in. I guess even just conceptually pursuing and seeing, what is the validity of or feasibility of this project, and if not this project, then potentially something else. It's always nice to play around with, entrepreneurial ideas, I guess. Yeah.
For sure. Okay. And do you know if there's anyone else who's developing something similar?
No, so I've done a little bit patent searching, and I haven't came across anything that's too particularly similar. In terms, there's like various different monitoring devices, and I think it's hard to prove, to Matt's point, the economic to validate the economics of the project. Why would anyone really pay for a wearable device when when a lifeguard on site is already being paid to sort of do the same thing? So can we justify that lifeguards do get distracted, and that these deaths can be preventable? Yeah, does the cost outweigh the benefit, essentially? So that's what we're looking at right now.
Okay. Well, my suggestion would be to go and talk to some of those lifeguards and just talk to them and see what they say.
The lifeguard.
I mean, obviously,
Matt's actually a lifeguard.
They probably. Sorry, what?
Matt is actually a lifeguard. He's our next interviewee.
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, because I think that would be another way to do it, right? To justify it and just explain. It's not like you're removing them out of the picture. It's just, can we help them somehow? And I also think, going back to the cost analysis, obviously, because you're targeting a niche, before you go and let's say your project goes along and everything is fine, you will have to calculate how much money you would use and how much money you can even make, because most likely you are not going to have obviously 100% of the market, right? Like you will have a small percentage initially, and the price you're going to charge them that's reasonable, will that cover the cost of your project or not? So you will have to make those decisions at some point.
Certainly. I actually have one last question that's sort of a tangent from this project discussion. So what I guess I feel like you've had a multitude of experiences working in the healthcare field, and I'm curious to learn which one of those roles, so for example, being a medical sales rep,
Mhm.
or I don't believe you actually, have you practiced like being a physician?
No.
Okay, so I guess, so a medical sales rep or working for R&D, what do you feel has been the most rewarding in your experience? Because I know you talked a little bit about being interested in business, and that's what drove you to pursue, your master's in business administration. So
yeah. Well, I think the most rewarding part is just to know that you help patients, because medicine in general was my passion for many years. And I think just knowing that some patients can benefit, especially if something new is being brought to the market. And I work with a couple of companies. There's small companies, let's say out of Europe, and they have something new technology, and they need someone to bring it here. They don't have enough financials, I guess, to hire someone full-time in Canada. So they work with someone like me. But if I can find a niche and patients, and that technology eventually gets into the hospital and patients use it, or let's say if it's implantable, it gets used on patient, that's the most rewarding thing for me, because I know that for that patient it was the right product and they had access to it. So that's how I see it. And this is why the business component is very important, because yes, clinical side of things, of course, like that's doctors are making the final decision, they making the final choice, and they work closely with the patient. But there's also that background work that needs to be done in order for a new technology to reach those end users, because it's not that easy, because government pays for, let's say, AHS, and AHS pays for the supplies, and supplies have to get into the hospital. So all that work needs to be done. And of course, end users have to be aware of something. So I think that is the most rewarding part, when something that is necessary for that particular patient, that particular condition, reaches the final target, I guess, destination. So I think that's the rewarding part.
Wow. So do you find that to be a very competitive space in terms of freelancing when it comes to trying to implement technologies in Europe? In Canada, for example, do you feel like there's a lot of competition with other people who do a similar job, essentially?
I would say so. But again, I think my job is relatively unique. I don't think there are too many people like me as a independent sales agent. I think majority of salespeople, they work for companies and represent companies. However, as I mentioned, I think for smaller companies where they cannot afford to hire full-time sales force, they usually choose people like me, and there are people like me in each province, and they do take on multiple projects for that reason, because they can actually take on, let's say, 3, 4, 5 projects and do them simultaneously. And this is how companies actually grow. They grow their sales, they're being introduced to the market, and then eventually they can grow big enough so they can come in and be established in Canada. So yes and no, it's competitive, but I would say also not as competitive on the independent side, I would say.
Okay, that makes sense. That seems quite fascinating, actually. It seems like a very dynamic job where you're constantly learning and adapting to different situations as they come. So that's definitely interesting. I think that's it for my questions. If anyone else has any questions for Anna before we wrap this up.
I've got nothing, thanks.
Nothing?
Well, thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you.
Well, good luck with your project. Yeah, good luck with your project. All the best.
Thank you so much.
Let me know if you have any more questions. Yeah.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
Have a good one.
Thank
Bye.
you very much.